Good evening and welcome, everybody. Thanks for taking the time out of your night to join us for this public information meeting. This information meeting is on the proposed delineation and assessment of critical dune areas. My name is Ryan Blazik. I'm with EGLE's Environmental Support Division. I'm just going to be helping to moderate this informational meeting. And with that, just have a couple things to go through before we get too far. First off, just have an introduction, which is what we're doing right now, just to kind of set the stage for the informational session tonight. And then we're going to follow that up with the actual informational session, which will include an EGLE presentation, followed by a question and answer session. So you'll be able to ask questions related to this presentation and proposed delineation and assessment. We're not going to take official comments tonight. This isn't a hearing, but we will let you know about the ways to submit a comment in case you would like to submit a comment. And then also we're going to cover who to contact with further questions. All right, in case you haven't joined us for one of these informational sessions before, all lines are going to be muted during this meeting. So you'll be able to hear us. We can't hear you. You can submit questions using the Q&A box in your Zoom toolbar at any time, and we'll answer those during the question and answer session. We also have an opportunity to ask questions verbally. We'll explain how we're going to do that a little bit later after the presentation. And then also we are recording this meeting. We'll be posting this recording on our YouTube channel in a couple of days. So it'll be available there in case you should choose to forward it on or watch it again. And with that, I would like to introduce our EGLE staff on the line tonight. Zach Chamberlain is a Great Lakes Shoreland Specialist with Water Resources Division of EGLE and is our presenter tonight. So welcome, Zach.
Thanks, Ryan.
All right, feel free to take it away.
All right, well, thanks again, everyone, for joining us this evening, taking time out of your Wednesday. I am going to start sharing my screen here. Give me just a sec. So I'm going to be presenting on our proposed delineation assessment of our critical dune areas. And like Ryan said, my name is Zach Chamberlain, and I'm the Great Lakes Shoreline Specialist within EGLE's Water Resources Division. So tonight I'll go through a little bit of background about Michigan's dunes, what critical dune areas are, how they're regulated, our proposed work plan, which contains the 3 areas you see listed there, our 3 work areas listed, what our next steps are as it relates to this delineation and assessment. And then I'll provide information on how to comment, and we'll have some time for questions and answers at the end. So Michigan's home to roughly 300,000 acres of coastal dunes. And our dunes are part of the largest collection of freshwater dunes on Earth. And here in the Great Lakes region is the only place you can find our unique combination of climate, topography, and vegetation. They host a ton of rare habitats, are home to threatened endangered species, and they also provide the people of Michigan and our visitors with significant recreation, economic, scientific research, and other types of opportunities. So what is a critical dune area and how is it different from those 300,000 acres? So critical dune areas, or CDA for short, are the dunes that were identified in the 1989 Atlas of Critical Dunes developed by the then Department of Natural Resources. The atlas contains approximately 74,000 acres of dunes along 300 miles of shoreline on Lakes Michigan and Superior. Within a critical dune, certain uses like contour changes, structures, and vegetation removal are regulated pursuant to Part 353, Sand Dunes Protection and Management of the Natural Resources and Environmental Protection Act, or Public Act 451, 1994. I'm not going to go into detail on critical dune area regulation and how to submit a permit or anything like that. But if you do need more information, you can go to Michigan.gov/criticaldunes, or you can contact me or your local staff person after the meeting if you're thinking about a specific project. So the 1989 Atlas started with information going back to the 70s, and it contains 3 main areas of dunes. The first being barrier dunes, which were proposed by William Buckler in 1978. These really came out of the first dune protection bills in Michigan related to sand dune mining. And he defined barrier dunes as the first dune assemblage from the lake with the greatest relative relief. That's typically about 80 feet or more, but there might be a little bit of variation in there. But based on our review, it's about 80 feet or more. So those dunes were included in the 1989 Atlas. They also included non-barrier dunes that exhibited certain dune-like features. Those were that they were composed primarily of dune sand based on soil surveys, that they extended for at least 1.5 miles along the shoreline and reached a height of at least 20 feet. So both of those types of dunes were designated based on their physical features. The 1989 atlas also includes exemplary dune-associated plant communities. These are based on Michigan Natural Features Inventory surveys from the 1980s of natural communities in the coastal zone. And there are approximately 20, I believe, exemplary plant communities that were designated, ranging from everything from interdunal wetlands and open dunes to Mesic Southern Forest and wooded dune and swale. So the 1989 Atlas is still currently what we use for the CDA or Critical Dune Area program. It has never been revised. One past revision was conducted in the 1990s, but the legislature did not amend the CDA law to use a new map. So we're still utilizing that 1989 Atlas for the regulatory program under Part 353. All right, switching gears to the delineation now. So why are we conducting an update? Primarily because we were directed by the legislature to do so. So in the fiscal year 2024 budget, which came out in 2023, the legislature wrote that EGLE shall conduct a delineation of sand dunes in the state and assess critical dune areas. And EGLE Water Resources Division is primarily responsible for the delineation, but given the large work effort needed to conduct a statewide assessment and mapping project of all the dunes in the state and developing a new critical dune atlas, we decided that the best path forward would be to set up a team with a contractor. So in August of 2024, we sent out a request for proposals, and we ultimately ended up contracting with a team of professionals from GEI Consultants of Michigan, who's the primary contractor, and has subcontracts with Michigan Natural Features Inventory, Michigan State University, and Michigan Technological University. So we're really excited about the team that's come together to work on this. We have professionals from both the private and public sector, and who have expertise in everything from geospatial analysts or analysis to ecology to geomorphology. So our goals for this delineation are kind of three-part. We have one, we want to fulfill the legislative requirements of the fiscal year 2024 budget, as we were directed to do. We want to develop an atlas that's aligned with the goals of Part 353 and protective of the dune resource. So that would include everything from preservation, protection, and enhancement of the diversity, quality, and functions of the critical dunes, public interest in the critical dunes, and balancing the benefits that those things provide us with the benefits of economic development and multiple human uses in the critical dune areas, which is what is called out specifically in Part 353. We also want to develop an atlas that will be considered by the legislature for adoption in Part 353. Like I mentioned previously, in the 1990s, they conducted a delineation. However, the legislature did not amend the law to use it. So we want to make sure that the map we produce is not only protective of the dune resource, but is something that we can engage with the legislature in, and hopefully they will choose to use. So currently, critical dune areas, like I mentioned, only are found on Lake Superior and Lake Michigan, but there are coastal dune systems along both Lake Michigan and Superior, as well as Lake Huron. So we're going to be studying dune systems along all three of the lakes for potential designation. And I'll go into some more information here in a moment about what our starting point is, like what our base map is that we're going to narrow down from. So EGLE and our contract team have put together a proposed work plan. A lot of the information in this presentation is related to version 1 of our work plan, but I do want to mention that that work plan is a living document. So we're continuously updating it as we gather new information or figure out better ways to do things. And I'll mention some of that stuff when I get to it later in the presentation about things that might change. But what's not changing is that we have these three main work areas that we're looking at. The first is to redelineate the critical dune areas using criteria similar to the 1989 Atlas. So those physical features, the things like those dune-like features that were 20 feet tall and 1.5 miles along the shoreline, or those barrier dunes that were based primarily on their height and their position relative to the lake. The reason we want to use similar criteria is because this map that we use now, the 1989 Atlas, has been around for over 30 years. It's become accepted by EGLE, by the legislature, and by the regulated community. And our thought process is that if we can use similar features with our current technology, we can hopefully produce a more accurate map of critical dune areas. Secondly, we want to look at potentially de-designating areas that are currently CDA that do not have the diversity, quality, or functions typical of the CDA. So these are areas that maybe were extensively developed prior to being designated in 1989, and have continued to be developed into today. And I'll go into a little bit more information about what that means and what that might look like. We also want to balance those potential de-designations with the designation of new areas that might contain rare or rare dune associated natural communities. So there are, some areas around the state that are certainly dunes and contain dune associated natural communities, but were either not mapped by Michigan Natural Features Inventory prior to the 1989 atlas, or that did not meet those physical features that were used in the 1989 atlas. So we're starting with a map of all dunes. We are using information from two past studies that were conducted. In 2018, the Michigan Environmental Council, with researchers from Michigan State University, produced a map of all dunes around the state based primarily on the physical geography, on the topography of the dunes. They used digital elevation models to go in and trace dune boundaries. In 2019, a team from Michigan Natural Features Inventory built upon that 2018 study and produced another map that also looked at physical features, but in addition to that, looked at dune health, ecology, natural communities, that sort of thing. So we've merged those two layers together in what we're calling our merged dune polygons, and have found about 300,000 acres of mapped dunes to start from. And then from this map, we'll be applying our various criteria to narrow it down to an atlas of critical dunes. So like I mentioned, our first work area is a redelineation based on physical features. And like I mentioned, we're using physical features similar to what was done in 1989. And I want to also say that this is certainly under review. So this was from version 1. We've been looking at potentially mixing up or changing the order of some of these questions, or modifying our height requirement. I think we were finding that just 20 feet tall, as I have listed there, might be too wide of a scope. So we're looking at maybe modifying a bit more to what they did in 89 and mapping any dunes that hit that 80-foot mark, like a barrier dune, and then adding additional requirements for the 20 feet tall, like perhaps it is a certain percentage of the dune is 20 feet tall. But some form of a height and length criterias will be used. And so specifically, we're looking at, is it a mapped dune per the Michigan Environmental Council 2018 study or the Michigan Natural Features Inventory 2019? So is it included in that merged dune polygon layer that I mentioned? Is the area within the coastal zone management area or within 1.5 miles of the shoreline? We want to make sure that our dunes that we designate are connected to our shorelines. We don't want to be mapping at some inland dune complexes, or what we might consider a relic dune complex from when Great Lakes water levels were significantly different in the past, because we certainly do in Michigan have some relic dune features that occur in like the middle of the state. Is the dune complex at least 1.5 miles along the shoreline? And like I mentioned before, this is one that you might shift in the order, or we might be looking at modifying. Is the dune complex at least 20 feet tall? Again, under review for modification, like I mentioned. And then if we can answer yes to all of these questions, we would propose it as this critical dune area, subject to a review by the contractor and EGLE team for those diversity, quality, and function factors. Has it been so extensively developed, or was it previously developed before it was designated in 89, such that it no longer has that diversity, quality, or functions? So I wanted to show this about how we're measuring height to give you an idea of the kind of geographic information we're looking at. A lot of it is based off of the topography of the dune area. So our contractor team, we have some really amazing geospatial analysts who have combined the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's bathymetric data with U.S. Geological Survey's topographic data and what we're calling our topobathy map. And so this is what we're going to use to measure height along the dunes and actually be able to draw those dune polygons from our starting map. And we're also going to be measuring the height from the low water datum, which our contractor team has now mapped along the entire shoreline, or almost the entire shoreline. Might be a few areas where we haven't finished yet. Um, and that low water datum was chosen because we wanted to be inclusive, given that there are low water conditions, such as what we're heading into now, and it's an established elevation by the Army Corps of Engineers that's been around for quite a while. So following our redelineation based on those physical features, that GIS review or Geographic Information Systems review, we want to look at, should existing critical dune areas be de-designated based on diversity, quality, and functions? Like I mentioned, these might be those areas that were developed before the law went into effect that might contain like a subdivision, for example, and don't necessarily have that dune feel or quality to them. So some of the factors we're looking at are percent natural lands, which we're getting from maps of impervious surface that were developed by NOAA. We're looking at how much of the shoreline has been armored with things like seawalls and revetments, such that we're not having that sand movement that's typical of a critical dune area. And we're also looking at things like road and home density, and looking at aerial imagery and oblique photography to kind of look at, is it all yards, or is it natural communities? Is it forest? That sort of thing. So based on these factors, we've developed a scoring system. And I got to mention the photos I'm showing here are a little outdated. We've changed which ones are yellow and red, the range of each score. Um, but we calculate a score and apply it to a grid along each of the dune polygons. So each little 100 by 100 meter, I believe, cell gets a score. And then we can kind of review all of that data together. And then we will conduct our field visits. We actually did some yesterday with the team. It was a really great exercise to kind of get out there and verify whether or not our data and our thinking at the desk is relevant when we're staying out in the field. Does it hold up? So once we've conducted field visits, and we've gotten all of our data collected, we started kind of working on this a little bit today. We'll review each area to make a decision based on that data and our field observations. And I want to mention that, there is we're not going to be de-designating things just because there's some development. There is definitely going to still be areas of critical dune area that have homes, that have roads, and will have development in the future. But we're really looking at those areas that have lost both that coastal processing side of things and the natural habitat quality functions in the back dune area. So for example, an area that has homes and development along the shoreline, but might have a really high quality forested back dune is something that we would be unlikely to de-designate. But an area that has a lot of development across the entire thing that maybe lacks both those coastal processes and has a subdivision on it, would maybe be proposed for de-designation. But again, we're still in that review process. And we've kind of come up with a guiding principle of, when there's doubt, we might just leave it alone. So if we have to debate it and we're like, well, maybe it could be a CDA or maybe it's not a CDA. If there's doubt, we decided that we should just leave existing CDAs as they are. And we also want to avoid carving out CDAs. So we're looking at, as much as possible, the whole dune polygon. So if there's, one area that's got some development, but other area that's natural, we would propose to leave that CDA whole, or that critical dune, or that dune polygon whole. So in addition to looking at de-designating based on diversity, quality, and functions, we want to balance with perhaps some new designations based on rare natural communities. Like I mentioned in the beginning, the current 1989 Atlas designated approximately 20 exemplary dune-associated plant communities. And you can see there in the photo some of the plant communities that were designated. We have open dunes and interdunal wetlands there at Wilderness State Park up in Emmett County. So we want to evaluate if the existing dune-associated plant communities or if new dune-associated plant communities should be designated. And this portion of the project is going to be primarily led by Michigan Natural Features Inventory data, looking at the existing polygons or element occurrences that they have of rare natural communities, and going out into the field and assessing whether or not those should be designated as critical dune area. So some of the potential dune-associated plant communities, this is certainly not an exhaustive list. And include the 6 I have here, and I'm going to back up and just mention that there's kind of 2 camps of dune-associated plant communities. Those communities that can occur outside of a CDA, but also are likely to occur on a CDA. So these are things like a mesic southern forest or a boreal forest. These certainly can occur outside of our coastal areas, but we have some dune systems that host really high quality examples of these. And then we also have our plant communities that are very dune specific. They would only ever occur on a dune. So things like an open dunes community, an interdunal wetland, a wooded dune and swale, or a Great Lakes barrens. So we'll begin by assessing the existing exemplary dune plant communities. Some have been reviewed by MNFI as recently as a couple of years ago, but others might not have been looked at since the 1980s. So we want to go back out and check to see if they should still be considered exemplary plant communities. And then we'll determine if new MNFI or known MNFI plant communities should be designated. And I say known because we're not necessarily going out and looking for new occurrences of these plant communities. We're going to use that existing database that Michigan Natural Features Inventory maintains. And those designations will be primarily based on the rarity of the plant community and the quality of the plant community. So for example, Michigan Natural Features Inventory gives every community a state rank, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, I believe. So if something's like an S1 or an S2 community, that would mean that it's quite rare in the state. I believe S2, I might be wrong here. Someone should fact check me after the meeting. But I believe it's less than 20 occurrences in the state. And so something that rare might be automatically included regardless of its quality. But something like an S3 is a bit more common. For example, I believe wood dune and swale is an S3 community, and we would want to go out because it's more common and assess those based on their quality. So while we're reviewing those new natural communities for potential designation, some of the factors that we'll consider also include, under that quality side of things, the condition. So what is the plant community like? Does it have the species typical of that plant community? Are the ecological processes that we would expect to occur in that plant community happening there? What's its size like? Larger occurrences are typically assessed more favorably. We wouldn't want to have a bunch of small, disconnected areas of CDA. It's typically preferred to have a larger protected area. And then landscape context, what's going on around it? Does it have natural buffers or is it developed, even though it's got the element occurrence there? That sort of thing. So looking at next steps, it's primarily going to be field work. So our contractor team has been hard at work putting together a field schedule and organizing our field work teams to get around the state and look at these things. And that's going to be kind of going on from essentially now until about September, towards the end of the growing season. So we got approximately 12 weeks spread throughout that time of field work ahead of us. We'll review past survey information before doing field work. So there might be areas that we haven't been to in a long time that we need to check back on, but there are some other areas, like I said before, where MNFI might have done a survey last year. So we have really recent data to determine. So that's kind of how we'll determine our field survey need. And then we have 3 types of field review, from a quick to moderate to intensive. So if we have a lot of data, or we have a pretty good idea of what's going on based on past surveys and based on aerial imagery or oblique photography, that sort of thing, we might only need to go in and do a spot check, just kind of drive to it, check it out, take some pictures and some notes, and that may be enough. If a bit more information is needed, our MNFI team has developed a rapid assessment to go out and not as intensive as a detailed survey, but more than a spot check, go out and collect the field data for these areas. And then finally, we do have that detailed intensive survey that will take place in those areas that maybe haven't been looked at since 1985, and we need to get a better idea of what's going on out there. And field work will take place primarily on public property, but may occur on private property, but only if we've gotten express permission from the landowner. So putting it all together, and this is our version 1, so this is definitely subject to change. We have come up with this kind of decision tree to guide us. And it has all those same questions, and it, it looks kind of like a lot, but we can really just break it down into its three parts. First, we have our redelineation process following that 1989 criteria. Second, we have the designation based on a rare dune system or rare natural community within the dunes. And then finally, we have that de-designate based on de-designate those areas that lack diversity, quality, or functions of the critical dune areas. Excuse me. So we have the field work coming up, but we're definitely going to continue to refine the work plan. Version 2 is in progress as we speak. And as I said at the beginning, it's definitely a living document and may be modified following this public comment period to make sure we're looking at things like public interest. Following all the field work in this first round of public participation, the contractor team will produce the reports and a map or a proposed atlas of the critical dune areas, which the senior members from the contract team and EGLE will review. Ultimately, EGLE will have the final approval over all the reports and work products. And once the contract is up next year, and we've gotten all of our final data, final map, and everything, EGLE will present that atlas and the reports or briefing to the legislature for their consideration. So I think the big question here is, will the delineation change the areas regulated by Part 353? And the answer is maybe. We don't know yet. Section 1 of Part 353 defines the critical dune area as those designated in the 1989 Atlas. So we are currently bound by law to use the 1989 Atlas. To use a new atlas, the legislature would have to amend Part 353. So as I said in that last slide, we'll present our findings to the legislature for their consideration and work with them, meet with them, or whatever else is requested of us to get them that information to potentially change the areas that are regulated by Part 353. So your public input, should you choose to comment, will be used in a couple different ways. One, like I mentioned, it may be used to help refine our work plan. Some of your comments may be help to identify potential areas for us to assess. And I think one of the big things for us is we want to ensure that this work aligns with the goals of Part 353. And Part 353 expressly speaks to the public interest in the critical dune areas and the diversity, quality, and functions and values of the critical dune areas. And so some of those things are really easy to measure from geographic information systems data, from aerial photography, that sort of thing. But there's certainly a human element to the critical dune areas that we can't capture with that sort of data. And that's where your comments would be really valuable. So if you'd like to provide a comment, you can write it to me by close of business or 5 p.m. on May 31st, 2025. You can send me an email at chamberlainz@michigan.gov, or you can write to us at EGLE Water Resources Division, P.O. Box 30458, Lansing, Michigan 48909-7958. If you, like Ryan mentioned at the beginning, this presentation is going to be posted to our YouTube if you want to review it again before you make a comment. And you can also find more information on the proposed work plan at Michigan.gov/CriticalDunes. So that is our overview tonight. We have lots of time for questions. I wanted to mention, if you have any questions about the information I just presented or about the work plan, about why we're doing a delineation or how we're doing delineation of the critical dune areas, those are the kind of questions we'll be taking now. If you'd like to make a comment, please do write those to me Ryan's putting the information up here. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning, if the focus of this meeting is definitely not on site-specific regulatory projects or projects that need a permit. If you need more information about those types of things, please contact your local staff person. You can find their information on that Critical Dunes website that was just posted in the chat, or you can reach out to me after the meeting and I can help you out if you have a specific regulatory concern.
All right, many thanks, Zach. Yeah, some good information. I will just kind of go through the ways or how we're going to do the question and answer session right now, and then I'll be providing those other ways or the ways to make a comment a little bit later on after this Q&A piece. But you can submit a question using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Just type it in, send it to us. Or if you prefer to ask your question verbally, you can click the raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen. That will raise your hand in Zoom, and I'll kind of go back and forth between anyone who has a raised hand and typed questions as well. If there's anybody on the phone who's calling in, you can raise your hand in Zoom by selecting the #2 on your receiver. So you can select the pound icon followed by a 2. That will raise your hand in Zoom, and I'll call on you using the last 4 digits of your phone number. So feel free to enter any questions at this time. I do have one in the question and answer box. Zach, the question is on the de-designate piece, does that mean if there's more armor or has more roads, those dunes will not be designated? And then will that encourage greater development?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So, um, just armoring or roads may not result in a de-designation. What we're really looking at is the combination of factors that would result in a loss of that diversity, quality, or functions. There are certainly going to be CDAs designated that have roads, that have some shoreline armoring, that have development within them. But if those areas are so extensive, have been developed so extensively, such that they lack that diversity, quality, and functions, those are the areas that we want to consider for de-designation. And so this is going to result in a proposed map. We know we're going to go through likely another public comment session again at the end. And this is the kind of things where your comments are really helpful for us. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be de-designated just because it has some development, or even there's areas that are fairly extensively developed that still have a lot of diversity, quality, and functions of a critical dune area. So we're kind of trying to look for those areas where there's been like nearly complete loss of that sort of diversity, quality, or function. And if it is de-designated, that would mean that it is no longer regulated under Part 353. But that does not mean that there aren't other land use restrictions in place, like local zoning laws or other EGLE administered natural resource protection laws.
All right, thanks, Zach. Next question is, if the legislature approves a modified map, will this program have funds to have the local governments update their zoning maps?
I am not certain of that question, if the legislature would appropriate new funds to update those maps. We would certainly make all of our maps publicly available on our web pages and through our GIS, our public GIS site for download. But I'm not certain if the legislature will appropriate funds to update local zoning maps.
All right, thanks, Zach. Next question, as the land division official for their township, I'm curious if there's a specific requirement for land division within a CDA. Is that addressed in Part 353?
So that's one that I'd be happy to talk more after this meeting, but just quickly, there are regulations related to subdivision development within Part 353, and they would require permits under Part 353. The biggest thing as it comes to land divisions is the potential to divide land such that it makes it really difficult to permit new development under Part 353. So if you were to split a lot such that it's completely lakeward of the crest, or it's all steep slopes, that would be the sort of thing that could be problematic from a land division. But again, if that's something that you want to learn more about, I'm happy to chat on the phone, or we can set up a meeting or something like that if you want to send me an email.
And I should mention I'll be providing Zach's contact info a little bit later on again, so you'll be able to see it again and have another chance to take a picture and write it down. All right, let's see here. I'm not seeing any other questions at the moment. We'll give it a couple minutes in case any pop up in there. If we don't have additional questions, the next step in the evening, we'll go through again how to make a comment, in case you'd like to make a comment to Zach. We'll also provide Zach's contact info in case you have any questions, and then we'll close it out after that. So I'm still not seeing any questions? And I should mention, this will be the only time we'll be taking questions for the evening. All right, I'm still not seeing any. So thank you for those of you who asked those questions. I hope that was helpful. All right, and this is the information how to submit your comments. You can submit a comment by email to Zach Chamberlain, Great Lakes Shoreline Specialist, Water Resources Division. You can also contact him by phone at 269-716-4894 or at chamberlainz@michigan.gov is his email. So chamberlinz@michigan.gov, or by mail to EGLE Water Resources Division, P.O. Box 30458, Lansing, Michigan 48909-7958. And as Zach mentioned, the work plan is posted at Michigan.gov/CriticalDunes. And then we're also putting this information in the chat, I believe, as well. So you'd be seeing it pop up there. And as Zach mentioned, written comments are going to be accepted until 5 p.m. on May 31st. And then if you have any questions, you can also contact Zach. Zach is a Great Lakes Shoreline Specialist with Water Resources Division. And again, his number is 269-716-4894 or chamberlainz@michigan.gov. That's chamberlinz@michigan.gov. All right, and so that about wraps us up. Last thing I'll leave you with here is just a reminder that this was recorded. This information session was recorded. We'll have it closed captioned and posted on our YouTube channel in a couple days, so you'll be able to take a look at it again at that time. And just wanted to wish you all a good rest of your evening, and a thank you for being part of this public information session. And Zach, thanks for sharing all the good info. So
Yeah,
thanks a lot.
thanks.
Have a great night.
Thanks, everyone.